Africa is home to 60% of the world's uncultivated agricultural land. Agriculture is the largest industry in Africa and contributes significantly to the continent's economy. In several African countries, over 80% of people who are working age work in the agricultural sector. Why then does the continent have the lowest level of food security and is a net food importer? Why did the most significant famines occur in African countries? And why did the cost of food across the continent increase so much after the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022? If you want to find out answers to these questions, watch this video carefully. But before we begin, please remember to use the like and subscribe buttons. We will discuss several important and controversial issues on this channel, and your support will help us with the algorithm. Sub-Saharan Africa has an abundance of fertile land, a lot of water, and a climate typically conducive to growing food. Its economies are also among the most rapidly expanding in the world. However, the region has the highest level of food insecurity in the world, mainly due to government failure. The main reason for Africa's food insecurity is lack of political will. Nelson Agyemang, Vice President of the Ghana Cooperative for Agricultural Producers, said during a recent agricultural conference in Cape Town, "We lack good leadership that understands that investing in agriculture will lead to poverty alleviation in general." He added, "Even though 70% of Africans work as farmers, famine and hunger still exist on the African continent, notably in the Sahel and Horn of Africa. In Sub-Saharan Africa, 1 in 4 people suffer from undernourishment, and every third child has stunted growth, according to the UDNP's 2012 Human Development Report. Contrary to popular belief, food insecurity most severely impacts agriculturally dependent nations. This is because smallholder farms provide 90% of Africa's food supply. These farms produce so little output that half struggle with food insecurity. Africa's population is anticipated to quadruple by 2050, meaning an extra 1.1 billion people would need to be fed, amplifying current issues. According to Mary Munene, coordinator for Kenyan agricultural cooperative Land O'Lakes, we will face a shortage of productive land by 2050 to feed the rising population. The causes of food insecurity are many. They include HIV, poverty, war, and crop failure brought on by droughts and floods. The most prominent causes of hunger, however, according to experts, are bad policies and underdeveloped institutions. Chronic food insecurity in Sub-Saharan Africa stems from decades of poor governance, said UNDP Regional Director for Africa, Tegenework Getu. Several African governments kept agriculture in the background by providing incentives, subsidies, and macroeconomic encouragement to other industries. As a result, most Sub-Saharan nations have had stagnant food systems, deteriorating rural infrastructure, and sluggish farming as a result of this bad governance. 95% of agriculture in Africa still depends on rainfall for its water supply, rather than the irrigation systems used by the rest of the world. Zimbabwe, formerly Africa's breadbasket, is a perfect example. Since a controversial land reform in 2000 transformed a prosperous, industrialized agricultural industry into one primarily focused on subsistence farming, Zimbabwe has struggled with food insecurity. Sithembiso Nayoni, Zimbabwe's Minister of Small and Medium Enterprise Development, states, "We have been going through difficult economic times. Dividing the small cake that is generated has been quite a challenge." According to Nayoni, up until recently, Zimbabwe's government has instead placed high importance on education to drive growth. Not all African nations are neglecting their agricultural infrastructure. Francois Kanimba, Rwanda's Ministry of Trade and Industry, has stated that his country aims to invest $235 million in rural redevelopment, with an emphasis on agriculture in the hopes of giving 40% of its farmers access to irrigation within the course of the following 5 years. In a 2021 essay in The Conversation, 3 Australian professors claimed that while geology and climate are factors, the actual cause is colonialism's residual impacts. They contend that before colonisation, African farmers produced hardy crops that were sensitive to the several distinct ecological characteristics on the continent and existed in peace with the environment. This situation was disturbed by colonialism, which imposed a new agricultural paradigm. Land and labour were diverted away from cultivating food to produce export products like cotton, cocoa and tea. Other experts argue that although colonialism has left its mark on Africa, blaming it for current problems is pointless and ignores the poor governance these nations have experienced since independence. These experts cite previously colonized countries in the East and South Asian regions that do not experience food insecurity as evidence for these claims. An alternative argument made by organizations like the World Resources Institute is that developed nation agricultural subsidies reduce African farmers' ability to produce food by distorting the global food market. However, non-food crops like cotton and sugar are typically most affected by these subsidies, and not the imported goods eaten in Africa, such as rice, maize and wheat. The inefficiency and uncompetitiveness of smallholder farms in Africa is another argument. Large farms are more common in nations with established and highly productive agricultural industries. These large farms bring economies of scale and more significant capital investment to increase productivity and outputs. While the staple foods of the African diet, wheat and rice, are largely imported, a large portion of the African farmlands have been utilized to grow crops like coffee, cocoa, cotton, and seed oil for export purposes. According to the World Bank, most of this imported food might actually be grown domestically. Substituting imported cereal with native crops would increase the self-sufficiency of African nations and reduce food insecurity. These products might be traded across African countries, providing crucial employment for their young and revenue for their farmers. The crops would also form the foundation of a wholesome diet. Indigenous crops could offer much healthier alternatives to the cereals currently in use. Pauline Chivenge, a researcher at the African Plant Nutrition Institute in Morocco, told DW. They have benefits that go beyond sustaining food security. They are more nutritious, so in addition to the necessary calories, they contain higher amount of protein and vitamins. However, for decades, indigenous crops have been ignored, primarily as a result of governments and international corporations encouraging the widespread cultivation of maize and wheat as food staples. In fact, maize, rice, and wheat production in vast, monocrop fields have been the centerpiece of research, development, and automation to the detriment of the region's biodiversity. However, most of Africa's water-scarce regions do not lend themselves to cultivating grains like maize and wheat. They rely heavily on consistent rainfall, which is becoming increasingly difficult in the face of climate change. According to Wolfgang Bockelmann, a food and agricultural economist at Humboldt University in Berlin, local products should be more heavily utilized. He led a research project on the domestic production and consumption of several indigenous vegetables in Kenya from 2015 to 2018. The vegetables we studied had previously fallen out of fashion and used to be known as the poor man's food due to the dominance of the foreign produce that colonization brought to Kenya, according to Bockelmann. Along with its environmental and human health benefits, indigenous crops can strengthen marginalized communities, particularly female farmers. In the margins of towns, many different kinds of crops can quickly grow in backyard greenhouses. A collection of small native crop farms can serve as a critical food supply for the growing population of slums and marginal towns in Africa due to the ongoing pattern of relocation from rural to urban areas. Increasing the production of indigenous crops has various challenges. Their minimal output is due to the smallholder farmers' lack of access to quality fertilizers. They also need the correct tools to process and distribute what they harvest. Most intra-African markets do not allow for fast delivery of fresh, unprocessed food. African nations cannot easily convert to growing their own crops, when exporting cash crops to wealthy countries is more profitable. According to Bockelmann, most of these nations are faced with a dilemma. African nations must decide between nourishing a significant portion of their people by promoting small-scale farming of indigenous crops or mass-producing products for export. The decision is made more complicated by larger monoculture farms being more productive and profitable due to being simpler to run and mechanize. The bulk crop is simpler to market and transport, which is another argument. According to its proponents, mass cultivation of exportable crops aids in modernizing and developing African agriculture and offers African countries economic clout in the international market. Establishing a globally connected market where each nation exports what it can best create while importing what it needs from other countries was formerly thought to be a good concept. But production and distribution will need to change due to turbulence in Eastern Europe. which is endangering the world's food supplies. Under a globalized food system, the whole picture is affected if one region can no longer produce its piece of the puzzle. Education and economic growth are simple answers to the issue of food security in Africa. Both of these, luckily, are moving in the correct path. The agricultural sector will become more professionalized over time, initially slowly, then accelerating. As African economies grow, and farming is seen as a career path for well-educated individuals with access to capital, knowledge, and technologies. This will increase productivity and decrease the need for labor. Africa will have fewer, better-trained farmers who can produce more food than the entire continent can eat. Additionally, as governments build vital infrastructure such as roads, it will be simpler to transport this food, removing the last obstacle to the continent's food security. Did you find this video interesting? If so, please hit the like button and let us know your thoughts about this issue in the comment section below. And why not check out one of our other videos on the global economy?